Be to God. The title of my sermon today is Why? Dr. Montgomery spent 15 years as an emergency room doctor at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. Dr. Montgomery has seen a multitude of injuries that resulted from simple stupidity. He tells the story of a man who was brought to the ER with severe facial and teeth injuries. Dr. Montgomery was appalled to learn how that happened. While drunk, this man had been driving around his neighborhood, lighting firecrackers off of a cigarette and then throwing them out the window. He was having a grand old time until he accidentally threw the cigarette and put the firecracker in his mouth. If you saw the movie, we might laugh as we did here. That's really dumb. And I've experienced the same way working in health, some examples working in healthcare. We cautioned and cautioned and cautioned folks not to smoke while they have an oxygen cannula on. You would think that would be common sense. We had a few folks end up in the emergency room with no eyebrows and not much hair. Why do such an idiotic stunt? Do you sometimes ask yourselves, why do people do the things they do? Or better, have you asked, why do I do some of the things that I do? I can't help but wonder that there were some scribes and Pharisees that Jesus talked to about in the reading that stopped and asked themselves, why do we wear such broad phylacteries? And why do we always have to be first? One such Pharisee was Nicodemus, who began questioning and found his way at the feet of Jesus. For you see, using the question of why at the right place and the right time might help us uncover true motivations. A question like, why are you here? That might be the first meaning of why. What motivated you to come here this morning? Is it because that's just what you do on Sunday mornings? Is it because you feel obligated or duty-bound? Is it because this is just what your family has always done on Sunday mornings? Is it to catch up on everything that's happening in your friends' lives? Only you can answer that question. And it's important, I believe, at times to reflect on the why, because it can connect us to our inner selves. Jesus had a lot to say to the Pharisees about being what? Whitewashed tombs on the outside, full of dead men's bones on the inside. We need to be connected to what is happening, not just outside, but in our hearts and in our spirits. The second meaning maybe of why are you here? Why are you here on this earth? It connects to finding our purpose in life. And yes, I know the Westminster Catechism equates the why with the question, what is the chief end of humanity? And it answers it with humanity's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy God forever. What does that mean for each of us? Excuse me. May we all know the answer to that question. And maybe we don't. It might be beneficial for us to spend some time answering the question so that even answering that question individually and corporately might help us, especially Westminster now, as you begin searching for what path God has for you. Why are you here? What is important to you? What is your call? A man walked into a restaurant, ordered a glass of milk. He took a sip of the milk and tossed the remainder in the face of the waiter. Before the waiter could recover from the surprise of what just happened, the man was saying, "I'm so sorry, I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. I keep doing that to servers. I can't tell you how embarrassing it is to have a compulsion like this." Far from being angry, the waiter actually was sympathetic. Before long, he suggested the man see an analyst about his problem. "I happen to have a great name of a therapist," the waiter said. "My brother and my wife have been treated by him, and he's as good as they get." The man wrote down the name, thanked the waiter, and left. The waiter smiled, knowing that he had done a good deed for a fellow human being. So about 6 weeks later, the man was back. "Did you do what I suggested?" the waiter said. "I certainly did," the man responded. "I've been seeing the psychoanalyst twice a week." He took a sip of the milk, threw it in the remainder in the waiter's face. The flustered waiter wiped again, his face with the towel. "The doctor doesn't seem to have done you any good," the waiter said. And he responded, "On the contrary," the man claimed, "he's done me a world of good." "But you threw the milk in my face again." The waiter exclaimed, "Yes." And the man responded, "But I'm not embarrassed anymore." I don't want us to be able to answer the why so that we won't be embarrassed, but to help us overcome what difficulties come our way. German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why can endure any how." Knowing your why is an essential first step in figuring out how to achieve what God desires for us. When we know our why, even amid a crisis, energy reserves are tapped. Our determination and courage that we didn't realize we had began to bubble up. And then our mission becomes more in focus. Our potential becomes realized, writes Maggie Worrell. She says the power of purpose is similar to the energy of light focused through a magnifying glass. Diffused light has little use, but when its energy is concentrated as through a magnifying glass, that same light can set a piece of paper on fire. Focus its energy even more, as with a laser beam, and it has the power to cut through steel. A clear sense of purpose enables us to focus our efforts on what matters the most, compelling us to take risk and push us forward regardless of the odds or the obstacles. And the church today, not just Westminster, the church as a whole, faces enormous odds and obstacles. And if it is to survive and thrive, it must ask the question of why seriously and begin spending time and energy to answer it. 4 questions I want to introduce to you. And then as I get together with you over the next Sundays, we'll explore these questions in detail. Margie Worrell helps us connect our inner selves when we ask the question, what makes us, you and me, what makes you come alive? I'm not talking about your favorite football team. I'll spend Saturday dedicated at least a couple hours to watching my favorite team. What inspires you? Not that. What breathes life into you? What are you passionate about? Focusing your attention on what brings the fire in your belly can help you then connect with God. Civil rights leader Howard Thurman once wrote, "Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, then go do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive." 2, what are your innate strengths? What are the things you've always been good at? Can you see patterns and opportunities amidst the complexity? Are you creative and naturally adept at coming up with outside-of-the-box solutions? Are you a natural-born rebel who can identify where the status quo requires a makeover? And if you are, good luck, especially in the church. We've never done it that way before. Are you brilliant in the details, naturally good at executing projects with precision? Or are you a naturally gifted communicator, technocrat, diplomat, networker, leader, problem solver, or change agent? What are your strengths? 3, where do you add the greatest value? Doing work that you're good at but loathe is not a pathway to fulfillment. That said, knowing your greatest strengths and where you can add value by applying then that education, skills, knowledge, and experience can help you focus on what God might be calling you to do. And then last, how will you measure what you've done? How will we measure our life? I did a clinical pastoral education residency at Carl, and part of that essential work was an exercise to write our own obituary. Ultimately, living with purpose means focusing on the things that matter most. As I said, I'm going to take each of these 4 questions and delve into them a bit deeper. It'll help us on our journey of life and to help us live a life well. Remember that no matter how difficult the task or overwhelmed we are, as we endeavor to discover our why, we'll also be encouraged to remember that Jesus has not abandoned us, but is with us. Georgie Knowles, in his book, A World to Love, tells about a pastor who, for years, fought what seemed to be a losing battle with a troublesome temper. Despite his best efforts, he experienced one defeat after another after another. One day, after a particularly violent outburst, he buried his head in his arms in absolute despair at his desk. Emotionally exhausted, he fell asleep. The pastor dreamed. He was in his study, and as he looked out his window, he saw a glorious light. As that light approached him, he realized that it was the man who was intended to be his guest. The pastor became conscious that his study was so untidy and in no condition to receive a guest. Frantically, the pastor's sweat began to sweep and dust the room, but the more he worked, the worse it looked. He heard a knock at the door and wondered what to do. I can't let him in while the room is in this condition. He continued his efforts to improve the appearance of things, and after a time, the stranger knocked again. What should he do? All his efforts were seemingly in vain. And when the stranger knocked a third time, the distraught pastor, exhausted from all his resources, flung open the door saying, "I can't do any more. Come in if you'll enter such a room." As the pastor looked up, he recognized the stranger. And that stranger was Jesus. The master entered the room, and strangely, as he did so, the dust seemed to disappear, and everything in his eyes seemed to become orderly. Things were bright and things were clean, but especially things were joyful. The master's presence in that moment did what all his feverish efforts had failed to do, had brought joy and acceptance. God is with us in our mess. Amen.